Hello everyone, my name is Brian, and welcome back to Now This Is Podcasting. Thank you for joining us here in Barb's basement, my fellow basement dwellers. So, this week we're going to be discussing a few different interesting topics in Mandalorian culture, and I'm just going to go ahead and let my guests introduce themselves, because I'm sure they have better intros for themselves than I would. Tad, I'll let you go first.
Sukui Gar, I'm Tad Larkin, host of Mandalore.
Hello there, I'm Sombraptor. You know me from my semi-viral Complete History of the Mandalorians video, or you may know me for my memes on Facebook, where I'm known as Mandalorian.
Excellent. Known for his memes. Yeah, but I was going to say, as we were talking about before, I came across one of your videos through one of these various Discords that I'm a part of. There's several that are going right now that are speaking about, like, legend stuff and a lot of sequel hate, which is, neither here nor there. But
it comes with the territory.
Comes with the territory. So I found the complete history of the Mandalorians through one of those Discord servers. So I went ahead and I watched that entire thing while I was making myself dinner one night. And I was like, this should be on the History Channel. I mean, if Ancient Aliens can be on the History Channel, I figure that the complete history of Mandalorians should be allowed to be on the History Channel as well. But I decided to get together two of the most well-known Mandalorian historians, which is yeah. So I wanted to go over, the Mandalorian timeline. So I feel like a lot of people, they maybe get confused as to whether or not Mandalorians are a species, whether or not they're a culture, because, with TCW, all of the Mandalorians that you see in the show, at least to my memory, they're all human. That's, to my understanding, is they're all human. I'm trying to think if I ever saw another species of Mandalorian.
In TCW, they're portrayed as fully human.
And I can't remember whether or not they're supposed to be a species. Like, they're just like, oh, we're just human, and it's always been a Mandalorian thing.
Wow.
But I know that's all centered around Mandalore, and I wanted to kind of get... I already know Tad's opinion about the Mandalorians and TCW, but I'd love to hear you guys give your hot takes on the Mandalorian timeline. Like, how do you guys view the Mandalorians in the expanding universe timeline? Can you give me a little bit of a rundown of who they are, what their culture is, and whether or not they are in fact a species?
Happy to.
Well, originally they were, in a sense, a species. They were a species called Tong, and they actually originated from Coruscant.
That's right.
Which was called something different back then, but
it's called Notron.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Coruscant was originally called?
Yep.
Yeah, so they were the original inhabitants of Coruscant before humans mysteriously appeared there. They had a massive war, which basically the humans of the time were they called themselves the Gel, and there was. During the final battle of their conflict or whatever, a volcano erupted, and which caused a massive pyroclastic flow and darkened the sky, and that actually saved the Tong from total annihilation. So they called themselves Dawerda Verda, meaning warriors of the shadow.
Do you guys both speak Mandalorian? You guys are so good with your pronunciations of this stuff.
He speaks it better than I can, but he also speaks two languages in real life.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So
3.5 actually, but
who's counting? Who's bragging here? So it sounds kind of almost, I don't know if either one of you guys are Game of Thrones fans at all, like A Song of Ice and Fire, but it almost sounds kind of like a Doom of Valyria situation where a bunch of volcanoes went off and just a mass extinction event kind of took place.
Once you mention it, yeah, there's similarities there. I wonder if...
Yeah.
Is George R. R. Martin a closet EU fan?
If he was going to like either one of the timelines, I feel like it would be the EU. And so the Mandalorians start off on Coruscant. And so at what point do they actually start to form their own culture and their own kind of warrior's way type situation?
Not really until Mandalore the Ultimate. He was the one that actually brought a lot of the humans in, where before there were close to none.
Exactly, because the Tong were driven off of Coruscant and basically wandered throughout the galaxy as nomads for several thousand years before their leader they found a perfect world they named after their leader, named Te Solus Mandalore, which then it became Andayaim, which in Galactic Basic they just called Mandalore. But
Gotcha.
they encountered like numerous species, decided on all of them. uh, there were small numbers of Andalian giants and Togorians, which they allowed into their ranks. But eventually, yeah, as Tad said, Mandalore the Ultimate opened entrance of any species into the Mandalorian ranks.
So like the original like Mandalorian species, did they just like slowly get bred out, or like do they still exist? Like I actually know very very little about the original like Mandalorian quote unquote species.
Right. So the Tong. So during the conflict known as the Mandalorian Wars, in which the Mandalorians invaded the Republic. This is what 9 years before KOTOR.
Are you talking about the Tales of the Jedi comics?
No, 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 no,
Like
no.
the
Sorry,
Sith
sorry.
Wars.
Sorry. There's two wars. There's yeah, no, the Tales of the Jedi.
Yeah, there's the one with
was
Exar
pretty much
Kun.
just Tong to my knowledge. No, sorry, but I meant it was during the Mandalorian Wars. The Tong, a lot of them died, and with such a massive influx of all the countless different species, they basically it's kind of vague as to why they disappeared. It's like either they just were just so many others that they literally couldn't find other Tong, or like it's
Are they
kind of
I'm
vague.
trying to remember like what they look like from the few like iterations I've seen of it. Aren't they like kind of like predators looking
I was
dudes?
gonna
Like,
say
they
they're
all-
very much Predator ripoffs without the weird mouths.
That's
the,
Actually,
the
look cooler than Predators. I would say.
eventually like they like start to form their own culture and stuff like that. So in this is kind of jumping like way down the line here, but in TCW, it's my understanding that well, like in the current like Disney canon, Jango Fett and Boba Fett are never at any point Mandalorians, and I have friends who like they only see like TCW and like all that other stuff. Like I have friends who are just fans of like broadly Star Wars. They're not really in tune with like the books and the comics and all that stuff. And they're like, well, Boba Fett's not a Mandalorian. I'm like, well, he becomes Mandalore in like the old expanded universe, so that would probably be news to him that he's not a Mandalorian.
So
And he's kind of an absentee like dad for the Mandalorians. He like kind of never shows up, and a bunch of them hate him.
So
Uh,
I was actually planning on making a video on this topic eventually, but screw it. So basically, in Legends, Jango and Boba are Mandalorians, full stop. Even though Boba wasn't really, he didn't really connect with the culture until later in life. In
He was too busy in
canon,
New Zealand.
it's complicated because basically George Lucas viewed it as that if there was an entire culture of Boba Fett's, as he put it, took away from Boba's specialness and Jango's specialness, which is like I see where he's coming from, but I absolutely disagree with that one.
the comic open seasons where it goes through Django's origin when he gets adopted by the Mandalorians, that couldn't have been published without some form of approval from George Lucas.
Yes, but how many times has George Lucas gone back on it?
So this is something that I've talked to a few people about. Is George has always George was the god of Star Wars, like everything. If because he made the mandate. Okay, I see a Jedi Wookiee here. Never do that again. he had that end say in everything.
But he
And when I always
had
tell
to
people
approve of Lobaka at one point, though. That's
Exact-
what
well,
gets me.
what I always tell people is people always forget that George Lucas was always very hot and cold on the expanding universe. Like in one moment he's like, this thing is definitively like
I love Quinlan Foster.
yeah.
Put them in the movies.
I love Darth Talon. Put her in the Darth Maul game, even though it doesn't make sense because they're in two entirely different timelines.
Then at other times it's like, the whole Vergere thing. Don't do that.
I'm very mixed on whether or not I like her being Palpatine's sort of as apprentice. But anyways, so people always forget that George Lucas he kind of like changed his tune like from interview to interview, like in terms of whether or not
that's it exactly. There's so much debate on stuff like that. It's like
there's some interviews where he's straight up like, this is Star Wars, like this expanded universe, it's other people are telling it it's not my Star Wars because my Star Wars is the main 6 movies, but this is everybody else's Star Wars. And then there are other interviews where he's like, I don't care, man, I'm just trying to eat my food here in this food court, leave me alone. He seems to change from interview to interview, but now at this point, like, just seeing George Lucas just makes me sad because he looks so sad, like depressed.
My view on it, really quick, before we get back to the main topic, is he did hire people to keep track of this continuity.
Exactly.
So if he didn't care about it in some capacity, it wouldn't exist.
And that's always what bugs me about like Pablo Hidalgo and people like that. Like I don't mean to like give anyone the impression they should go and, you know, dogpile on somebody, but leave people alone on Twitter. But like people that worked for Lucasfilm prior to the Disney purchase in 2012, pretending like this timeline that was entirely my job and my life previous to Disney buying it, that doesn't matter and it's stupid. But it was very, very important to you not even 2 years ago. So how are you pretending like it's nothing now? Like, I've never understood that.
But it's like I've never had such a change of opinion on. It's like again, do not dogpile on Twitter or whatever. But it's like,
yeah,
I used to have such a respect for Pablo Hidalgo for, you know, how knowledgeable he was on like everything Star Wars.
He was the guy.
Condescending and like unnecessarily rude to people on Twitter. Like whenever fans like, you know, even like, yes, I understand it's a stressful job. Do we use profanity in your?
I mean, yeah, sure. It depending on what it is, I'll bleep it out. But
I understand there's a lot of dumbasses that come late,
mm-hmm.
but still doesn't like there are so many cases of people asking questions politely to him, and it's like his response is basically you're stupid.
His response, like, you're dumb and this was never canon and all that. Like the whole statement that this was never canon is so idiotic to me because it's like,
don't get me started.
There were so many different, because it wasn't just like the multimedia project. There were other instances of them hardcore pushing like, this is the next generation of Star Wars stuff, like whether it be like the Thrawn trilogy or
the Empire,
whatever.
As I said in our first interview, it was all advertised as Star Wars. It was all
exactly
thing.
And that's how.
But then, like when Disney bought, all of a sudden it wasn't important anymore. And it's the same thing that I was talking to like my fiance the other day. I was like, it's probably a similar situation to Pablo Hidalgo as it is with George Lucas. Like George, for who knows how long, like, you know, 20 years has been being told, you ruined my childhood by making the prequels, yada yada. It's probably the same thing with Pablo Hidalgo. I'm sure that once Disney purchased Star Wars, everyone was like, oh, you should like quit or something like that. But like, you never see George Lucas going in an interview and just being like, hey, everybody who liked my stuff, I hate you, and everything you liked never mattered. So that's like the key difference between the way that people who worked for Lucasfilm are handling it now, because so many old guard carried over to Lucasfilm. And the one thing I really wish that had carried over was some of those old EU authors. Like, they still have, like, they haven't brought anybody back outside of Timothy Zahn. And I'm like, just give us a little bit. Just give me something here. Yeah, just like give me something here from the old expanded universe.
And, I mean, there's James Luceno, but that's yes. Sorry. To get back on topic, what I was going to say is, yes, in canon, it's complicated because the official word on it by everyone is no, they are not. However, from an in-universe context, it makes zero sense for a number of reasons. A major one is, why would Slave One's interface be in Mandoa? Django wasn't a Mando. Why is there's several pieces of evidence that make it completely nonsensical, but I'll save that for my own video.
The whole thing with Boba Fett in the former expanded universe, or what I would consider like our Star Wars, is, yeah, he was Mandalorian for like a lot of like the Legacy of the Force books, but then like when Disney bought all of a sudden it was like, oh, you should like quit or something like that. But like, you never see George Lucas going in an interview and just being like, hey, everybody who liked my stuff, I hate you, and everything you liked never mattered. So that's like the key difference between the way that people who worked for Lucasfilm are handling it now, because so many old guard carried over to Lucasfilm. And the one thing I really wish that had carried over was some of those old Like he just kind of seems disinterested in being involved, even though he's Mandalore. And like whenever he shows up, everyone's like, it's kind of like mixed feelings as to whether or not they actually respect him.
Yeah.
And some people outright are just like, dude, like you went out to go get cigarettes 20 years ago and you never came back. And
because for most of his life he was pretty disconnected from the rest of
The
Mandalorian
culture.
It was only after the previous Mandalore, Fen Shisa, he died like saving Boba's life, or rather was mortally injured, and as his like dying request, he basically asked Boba to become Mandalore, and he's like, well, okay.
he's like, here, take my helmet. What else was he gonna do? Is that what you said,
Yeah.
Ted? What else did he have going on? You know,
From my
he was slowly dying.
my interpretation from reading the Legacy of the Force novels is he wasn't so much disinterested in being Mandalore. I felt like he didn't feel like he deserved to be it. I felt like he was in a pair of pants that was a couple sizes too bigger.
That's exactly it, because he constantly compared himself to Fen Shisa and to his father.
Mhm.
He's like,
And he's like, I remember one sequence, I believe it was in Sacrifice. It's his internal monologue, and he sets a reminder to download like a Mandoa translator onto his helmet HUD, so when people are talking, he can understand them. And
Oh wow, he couldn't even speak the language.
no, he could barely speak Mandoa. I think he only knew a couple curses, and
It's always the first thing.
Weird, Dikut.
actually, his granddaughter Mirta Gev ends up teaching him a lot, as well as a couple of Mondos he befriended along the way. But
And I'm always like mixed on my feelings about Boba Fett being involved in the Legacy of the Force books, because I know that Karen Traviss just loves clones and she loves Mandalorians. And I remember, like, you know,
He's a very
Reading-
controversial figure.
yeah, and I remember like, reading Legacy of the Force and being like, whoa, wait, Boba Fett's in this? I was like, since how and why? But, and like, I knew that, like, it being Karen Traviss, like, she outright, like, hates Jedi. Like, she thinks that they're kind of like the villains almost. Like, the way that she writes Luke
Yeah.
from, like, you know, previous books, even in that same series, he's like borderline evil and demonic. At least from like my understanding of like reading them.
I was
I'm just like,
surprised when he outright killed Lumaya. I'm like, that's
yeah,
something I
yeah,
don't think Luke would do.
yeah, and like, but I actually love Legacy of the Force. But I'm not gonna lie, there are some times where if I'm rereading them, like, okay, I'm just gonna skip over these Jaina chapters with Boba Fett, and I'll just skip over to some of the more interesting stuff.
So much good Mando lore, though.
But see, for me, I'm like, I've already read it, and I don't.
And without those sequences, we wouldn't get any sort of closure for Republic Commando.
Yeah, so like that's one of like the
caveat, because we're never gonna know. I mean,
I'm just gonna go cry in a corner right now.
she gives ideas what happens to these storylines in Republic Commando, but we'll never know. And the closest we can get to a tying up of some loose ends is Legacy of the Force. And you know, thank God she did that.
And it's one of the very first introductions to my personal favorite. I'm sure that everyone's going to hate me for mentioning this again, but it's one of the first introductions to the One Sith in the Legacy era, and they show up in those novels for a hot second.
Oh, well, okay. For the record, my specialty in Star Wars is mostly Clone Wars era, Galactic Civil War era, like post RTJ stuff. Like, you know, I've read all of Heir to the Empire, I've read Dark Empire, I've read a decent bit of Legacy of the Force. So most of what I say is mostly stuff I've read on from or heard from people. But because it wasn't like Crate like semi involved in like stopping Abeloth and stuff like that.
He was like outright like involved in it. So
okay.
In Legacy of the Force, that's like when Alima Rar goes to Korriban, which this to a certain extent, I don't understand why Sith would still go there to hide, because everyone kind of knows, like, hey, if Sith are going to show up from somewhere, it's probably going to be here. But Alima Rar goes there, and she runs into, like, White Eyes and all that other stuff, and Crate and Lumaya, like, kind of pseudo get in contact through that. And then Crate has to, like, kind of team up with Luke Skywalker in the Fate of the Jedi series.
That actually sounds really cool.
See, and like, I'm not huge I'm not huge on Fate of the Jedi in general. I there's certain like the way the books first start off is essentially with the government going, "Hey, Luke, get the fuck out of here," and like that's kind of a bummer to me because I felt like a lot of those authors were just
like Natasha Dala takes over or something.
But that I find that interesting though, because it's basically almost a commentary on the entire Star Wars universe, where it's like, hey, so for the past 100,000 years or 25,000 years, you guys have been the one to start all this shit. So why don't you go
every
as
single
far away
time
from us as possible?
But see, my issue isn't necessarily with that. My issue is more that I felt like every single one of those authors, like kind of during that time period, were just stumbling over themselves to try and write like the big end for the main three. It's like the same issue that I had with like the Marvel Ultimates universe, where I felt like all of the authors of Marvel Ultimates were like, "Oh, I'm going to be the first one to write about Deadpool, or I'm going to be the first one to show Venom," and like all this other stuff because I felt like all those authors were just trying to give like a bookend to the big three, and it's not necessarily like the plot and the build up to it that I don't enjoy. It's more of like, okay, so Jason was the big bad, and now Abeloth's the big bad, and one of my biggest regrets for the Formless Expanded Universe is not being able to see how the main three die. I would have liked to have seen, personally, you know, as somebody who wants to be an optimist about the original three, Han, Luke, and Leia, I would like for them all to peacefully die in their sleep or sacrificing themselves against some big evil.
Right.
But I didn't love the Fate of the Jedi, but I loved Legacy of the Force. Like that, I know that a lot of people aren't super hot on those books. I love them. Like even with the Boba Fett stuff, I still really enjoyed them a lot. They're one of my personal favorites.
Okay, well, I'll put it on the list.
You for sure, I would check it out, and I would recommend everybody, probably against your better instincts, read the Yuuzhan Vong stuff. It's actually very, very interesting, despite the fact that it's a Star Trek villain.
Vector Prime, actually.
They're actually a pretty good set of books. I enjoy them quite a bit. Like I
read Vector Prime whenever I want to get hurt.
Oh no! Now I'm just reminded about what happened. No.
Yeah, and man, they hit you quick in that series of books. They're like, we're not messing around. Everybody is gonna die.
Safe.
Yeah, that's. I downloaded the audiobook maybe a month or two ago, and I started listening to it, and I was like, oh man, I forgot that this happens, without spoiling anything.
Yeah,
but
I'm gonna shut up now. I'm not gonna.
It's been 30 years, but yeah.
True. It's not exactly.
It's been a hot minute.
Anyways, getting back to the main topic.
Right.
So,
thank you, Tab.
whereas Boba he wasn't raised as a Mandalorian, but kind of fell into the culture later in life. Jango
had like an inverse kind of.
Yeah, almost. Jango wasn't born a Mandalorian either, and one could even argue that when George Lucas says, "Oh, the Fets aren't Mandalorian," he could be saying, "Oh, they weren't born Mandalorian." But that's
yeah, I guess.
if you want to get technical. But
yeah,
Jango gets his parents get murdered by the Death Watch when he's like 10 or 12. 8.
Wait, no, sorry. I think 8. Yeah.
I don't remember exactly how old he is, but in the comics, he looks like a child Boba actor. So
Daniel Logan.
Daniel Logan, yeah. So
his famous line of "Yep."
That's my go-to reaction image.
Dad, Tonwee's here.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Yep, and possibly.
Well, sorry. Go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
But yeah, his parents are killed when he's around a young age, and he kind of ends up getting adopted into this culture. And I believe you see something similar to that in The Mandalorian. But
they have like a foundling system, yeah.
Yes. So they in the new I guess in The Mandalorian they've given it a proper name for something that's been like a major part, but of Mando culture, but hasn't had a name.
It does have a name.
What's the name in the old EU?
Guy Balmanda. It's
that's the process, not the title for someone who.
So the process is basically finding like
Guy Balmanda,
like wayward
name and soul. It's like they like Karen Travis, like in her writing, she made it clear that like everything in there's not much like long drawn out ceremony in Mando culture. Like marriage, adoption, everything is just
A
it's
handshake
short,
agreement.
short just statements like that. It's like I forget how it is in Mandoa, but it's the Mandalorian adoption vow is just I know your name as my child. It's a no sorry. Ni Kirtal Gar no, Ni Kirtal Gai Saad. I think that's how it is.
Yep.
Tad's like checks out.
Yeah.
I checked my Mandoa to English conversion.
No, it took me when I did my Mandalorian culture video. It took me like 30 tries to pronounce it to a point where I was happy. That's the only reason why I memorized that.
So yeah, like in the Mandalorian show, which I'm even kind of confused about, like the Mandalorian culture and the new stuff, because it suffers the same fate that a lot of people say the old EU stuff suffered, where the timeline and like the canon kind of is all over the place. So in the TCW show, Mandalorians are taking their helmets off like crazy, even those like that are in the Death Watch or whatever.
Yes.
But in the Mandalorian show, it's you don't take your helmet off in front of anybody. It's super sacred. Your face, like you don't show anybody your face.
This is all subject to changing whenever the Mandalorian like essential guide or whatever comes out. But
They've only had one.
to my understanding, it's the tribe is basically a like very strict, very I guess ceremony like I was just talking about ceremony, but very
Traditional.
yeah, I guess the jokes I've made with my friends is they're basically like hyper orthodox.
Yeah, I was just about to make that same
Like,
comparison.
but yeah, there's been some. They're a really interesting subculture to me. It's like, oh, this isn't a jetpack. This is the rising phoenix. This is. It's like there was even like a meme. It's like the whole like Drake pointing to blank. It's like,
Oh yeah.
rising phoenix.
Whereas an original Mandalorian from the EU would be like, "What the heck is this D-cut talking about?"
It's just a jetpack, man.
But
so Jango Fett, Boba Fett, full stop, they're Mandalorians. So in terms of Mandalores, who would you guys kind of think of as being your favorite Mandalore?
and she saw full stop.
Jester.
Ooh,
And give me
that's
like
close.
give me like their blurb. give me why you think they're the best Mandalore.
I'll let you go first.
Well, Jester Mareel set up the way the Mandalorians are, like the classic Mandalorians. When you think of like Boba Fett in the Galactic Civil War era, and Ven Shisa, and he's the one that made them, and like it brought honor back to the Mandalorians, because before that they were just pirates. They were raiding. They were, they were selling themselves short. And he basically came in and said, "Hey, listen,
Let's be honorable. Let's stop.
if you want to go out and kill things, which I understand because we like killing things, do it for money at least.
At least get paid if you're gonna do it.
Do have a legal binding contract where you do it for money and not robbing people."
Tor Vizsla took issue with is like, no, hey, I don't want to be, responsible for my actions. No.
So Tor Vizsla, correct me if I'm wrong, but is he one of the Mandalorians that crosses over between both universes, expanding universe and
no? He was the original leader of Death Watch, and he has some connection to previous. We're not sure if he's his father or uncle or whatever. He's he's the founder and original leader of Death Watch, but there's not.
So who's Darksaber Mandalorian? Which one was that again?
Tar Vizsla. He's the one who forged it, and then.
Oh, I thought it was a she.
Nope. Pretty sure he's a dude.
Well, here I'll Google Darksaber.
Are you thinking of Shay Vizsla?
No, and
No.
So is Shay Vizsla like one of the main ones in.
SWTOR.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Let me see here. Say handcrafted by Tar Vizsla. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he is a dude.
Jedi boy.
His statue looks a lot like Isildur from Lord of the Rings, but all right.
You're not wrong. It's pretty on the money. So I like how he's kind of adapting the Jedi culture there with still kind of having the Mandalorian-esque looking mask.
I'm comparing the image between that and the Argonath bookends on my shelf here.
There you go.
Oh,
I'm still kind of like torn between whether or not I like Jedi Mandalorians in general. You know what I mean?
I have very mixed feelings because
You were actually having a conversation on Discord about this earlier, weren't you?
yes, okay.
On the deep
difference
core
between a Jedi Mandalorian, a Mando turned Jedi, and Jedi turned Mando, because
the only
people will
instance I
bring
can think
up
of
Arden
Jedi
Josic
turned Mando is KOTOR.
He's not a Jedi Mando. He's a Jedi turned Mando. People bring up Dor Jandor Case. He's not a Jedi Mando. He's a Jedi turned Mando.
Turncoat kind of guy.
There's I don't know, when you put them together, it just kind of feels like some 12-year-old kid self-inserts like, he is a Jedi and a Mando. Whoa. Like,
Yeah, I get that. I get that vibe.
But it's like there's possibility for interesting story, but it feels, Gary Stewish, like no.
What is it, like the Mandalorian Knights, the ones that are in KOTOR, like the ones that
in the KOTOR
join up with
comics?
the
Yes,
Mandalorians?
so those are
Yeah.
Jedi's turned Mando. They're the KOTOR War comics.
And I still don't like really understand their position, because they're like, well, they're really the victims here, and I'm like, yeah, but like they nuke a planet into glass, so like, are they really right?
Are you really? Are you really though?
They look super cool though. Like, what was that?
I said, is there anybody forgetting the Cathar genocide?
Yeah, exactly. So that's when they're like,
Deserved it.
they're like, no, they're the ones that are in the right. The Jedi and the Republic are the ones that are oppressing them. I'm like, yeah, but they're like literally committing genocide. So it's like, how are you okay with this? They look cool though. Like they look really dope with their.
The Jedi only ever indirectly commit genocide.
It sounds like we have a real Karen Travis here.
Though I don't think the Kalish much care for technicality.
So, I'm sorry. What was your blurb on why you liked your Mandalorian leader the most?
Yes, Fen Shisa. Okay, so to casual audiences, he's very obscure, but basically he originates in the very first appearance of Mandalorians outside of Boba. Like this was in a comic that came out before Return of the Jedi, even. So, Fen, he's so his original story is basically he fought during the Clone Wars alongside Mandalore the Resurrector, aka Spar, and but was for the Separatists, and eventually in a group called the Mandalorian Protectors. Eventually Palpatine was like, yeah, no, these guys, I need them out of the way. So he orchestrated getting massacred, basically. See, that happens a lot. Yeah. But,
a lot of massacre involved.
Yeah. So he was one of the 3 survivors of the massacre. He's like, okay, I'm going back to Mandalore. I'm just gonna sit here. But we really need a Mandalore, but it's like, you know what? I need to find the next Mandalore. So he spends a handful of the Republic Commando books going around. It's like, hey, do you want to be Mandalore? Do you want to be Mandalore? And people were like, why don't you be Mandalore? And it's like, fine. And so he's very reluctant to do it. By God, does he do it well? Because he, during one of the darkest periods in galactic history, he manages to keep their shit together for as long as possible until the Empire fully subjugates Mandalore and actually starts enslaving people. It's like, oh. So he starts his resistance movement, and then events of the comic begin. So Leia comes to Mandalore, searching in between Empire and Return of the Jedi. She's looking for Boba because, or rather, sorry, looking for Boba because she's like, need to find Boba in order to find Han.
Mm-hmm.
So she finds him. She mistakes him for. Was like, nope, not me.
Wow, racist Leia. Jeez.
They all look the same.
Whoa, Tad, come on now.
Hey, I can say that. I'm a Mandalorian.
I felt that coming.
We're all T-visors here. Yeah, basically, stuff happens on Mandalore. Leia helps them overthrow the Imperials there. The Protectors join the rebellion. Then, yeah, later on down the line, so as I explained earlier, he has an encounter with Boba, because as I mentioned, he fought for the Separatists during the Clone Wars, and that involved an attack on Kamino. So Tan Wei puts a bounty on him all those years later, which comes to haunt him. So Boba is like, well, I need and this is post Sarlacc, so he's
post digestion, Boba.
So he accepts the bounty and goes after him, but through some sort of events kept kind of vague, and ends up saving his life. And he's like, as his dying wish, he's like, become a Mandalore. Like, well, okay. So the reason I love him so much is yeah, he very much follows in Jaster Muriel's footsteps in being very reformist, like honorable. Just don't go around just murdering because you feel like it.
Do it for a good cause.
He's
your bank account.
He's very much one of the pinnacles of Mandalorian honor that there are. He's one of the, you could legitimately say he's a good dude. Like, it made some questionable, like, stuff, but always.
He's also pretty instrumental in setting up the New Republic.
Well, yeah, because he's part of because before the rebellion managed to become the New Republic proper, they had a interim government they called the Alliance of Free Planets, and yeah, like Mandalore was one of the major players there.
I mean, they basically go back to that same exact title through a few different iterations of the galactic government.
Oh yeah, and then there's the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances, which is
it's a mouthful.
Which is all like a roundabout way for it to spell GFFA because
I still don't understand why
the galaxy far, far away. Haha, funny.
What were you saying, Ted? You don't understand why?
I still don't understand why they did away with the New Republic for that.
Because the Yuuzhan Vong showed up. That's why.
I haven't finished the New Jedi Order series yet, so
to me, there's not a ton of reasons why they would change it.
To my understanding, it was so they could do the whole GFFA thing. It's like because people have always referred to it as the galaxy far, far away, the GFFA. So it should make sense that the ruling body is the GFFA, which okay, sure,
there's just so many different iterations of galactic government that have gone through, and so like, in the grand scheme of things, the Empire is like a little tiny blip until in the old canon they all of a sudden very much aren't a little tiny blip anymore, and the one Sith are back and they've just brought galaxy-wide destruction again. But so basically, like when the Yuuzhan Vong like blew up the entire government, everyone had to get involved. Basically, everyone had to like come together and help out. And through some back-handed ways, they changed the name of the government, and they would go by the GA, just the Galactic Alliance, and that's like what Darth Caedus was getting his rocks off on, was basically being like the emperor of the Galactic Alliance and whatnot.
Right.
Yeah, and that's when Boba Fett is like, "Hey, how about instead of fighting your brother with a lightsaber, just stab him right in the gut with a knife instead?" That was like ultimately his word of advice was like, "Hey, when he's not looking, just stab him real good right in the stomach."
Just do a little stabby stab right there.
Yeah, he's like, "Take this pointy bit, bam, there you go."
Stick him with the punch
So,
end.
yeah, I also wanted to get so there's tons of Mandalorian stories out there, but Tad, I'll let you go first. What is like one of your favorite Mandalorian stories? Even if you want to throw a few at me, like what would be some of your recommended reads?
Oh, the Republic Commando, hands down.
Like, okay, I have a heavy bias because it really was. Well, there's three pieces of media that are debatable as my introduction to the EU, but Public Commando is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
The novels. I mean, the game has references here and there, but it doesn't directly touch on anything of the Mandalorian culture.
Because in the Republic Commando games, you just play as Republic Commandos?
Mhm. Well, the thing with Delta Squad is
Delta Squad.
they were trained by Wallen Vow, who, unlike Cal Skirata, didn't really care about his clone trainees. He didn't view them like Cal Skirata did, which was they were children. So he taught them nothing about the Mandalorian culture or
They
anything
knew
like
Fordean and but
right, but they didn't see themselves as Mandoade. Like
They just saw themselves as clones.
yeah,
exactly.
and Wallen Vow himself is interesting because he is basically just a spoiled rich kid that decided, I want to be a Mandalorian. So
Bought himself a college degree in Mandalorian.
bought himself some armor and decided I'm being a Mandalorian.
And that Beskar, it's not cheap.
No.
No, it is.
And that's like what that's another thing I've always really enjoyed about the Mandalorians is just they just have some pretty dope armor. Like they found like the best element in the galaxy and they're like, this is all mine now. You're not allowed to touch it. This is our stuff.
One of my favorite things, yeah, like in both their culture and their aesthetics, it's one of my favorite things about them is that they're a massive mishmash of like real life, like, you know, warrior culture or just warriors. It's like, okay, so they've got, you know, they've got the samurai style honor bushido. They've got like got western they've got like, you know, gunslinger aesthetic with their
even like the cape draped over the shoulder. Even.
Exactly. Sorry. This went off topic. Tad,
No, you're good.
With why you think Republic Commando is a great place to start.
It is the place to learn the Mandalorian language, learn about their customs, learn about just how they do things. Because through the novels, you're introduced to these concepts and ideas and these cultural norms. And that's where you learn to respect them.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you kind of view a wider galaxy than just the narrow, dogmatic Jedi versus Sith, where you discover that there's more, that there are other people that have their own cultures and their own views, and what their place is in the galaxy. And it's just, if you want to learn more about Mandalorians, that's the place to start.
That's if I had to pick another one, because yeah, it really much like if you're wanting to go in depth on that. If I had to pick another one, I would say Jango Fett Open Seasons, because events in that story pretty much set up how Mandalorians are like it sets up how they are during the modern era. It shows the Mandalorian Civil War. I mean, it is
a lot of cool visuals
an
from that
origin
war.
Story for Jango, but oh, sorry, were you saying something?
No, just a lot of cool visuals from like that Mandalorian Civil War.
Yeah.
It's just like cool to see Mandalorians flying in the background, shooting other Mandalorians who were like firing up with them. It's just chaos.
And great artwork also. But, though, in terms of non-story content, I guess there's the in-universe document, the Bounty Hunter Code, which one segment is the Death Watch's manifesto, which like goes over history from their perspective. Most of the lore is pieced together from different segments. Like there's stuff from the Essential Guide to Warfare, the Essential Chronology, and I'm referring mostly to modern era stuff. If you're wanting to see ancient Mandalorians, look at the Knights of the Old Republic comics. They like tie in other KOTOR tie-in stuff.
That's been like one of my biggest jumping in points to Mandalorian culture in general was always the KOTOR stuff. So like reading like Cassius Fett, I was like, oh wait, there's Fett's like a clan that's like a group of it's like a continuing family line. And that's like when I first had like those, I was like, okay, Mandalorians, they look super cool. They're like, you know, the rough and tumble cowboy types of the galaxy and stuff like that. And it's cool to see one person bring all of these mostly individualistic yet also tribal like cultural people, having them all come together, and they're just like, you know what, why don't we start our own government, take over the galaxy? And then seeing them like bomb planets in the glass and like committing genocide and stuff, it makes it very much black and white, good versus kind of evil. But there is that internal struggle that's shown in the KOTOR comics of not every Mandalorian is down for that. Like a lot of Mandalorians, like a few over the series, like step up and they're like, maybe we shouldn't be committing genocide if we plan on.
Exactly, because that's exactly it. With especially Evan's mask is a Mandalorian mask, because he saw a vision of this one Mandalorian who defied Cassius Fett's orders to genocide the Cathar. He's like, she said like, no, we've proven our superiority over them. And it's like,
we've already won.
No, they're blah blah blah, affront to our honor, blah blah blah. But if you truly believe
people, blah blah blah,
you can die with them. I salute you. Then Revan like saw a vision of that, vowed to take up her
mask and her cause.
Bingo, exactly. Which I always found so like poetic.
That like he's fighting Mandalorians, yet he's like identifying with one of them has like turned their back on the rule of law they've kind of put through. And I've always been conflicted with how I feel about Mandalorians and SWTOR in general. Like I love SWTOR. Like Tad's heard me talk about how I've spent hundreds of dollars on armor and SWTOR, and I've like spent hours and hours and hours playing that game. But I really don't like what they do with Revan. I don't like...
Understandable.
I think the Revan book is hot garbage. It's probably one of my least favorite Star Wars books ever written. Like, I really don't like it. And like I remember, because it was written by Drew Capuchin, I was like, sweet, like Darth Bane author. Like, I can't...
Considering the writer, but...
Yeah, and then like I sat down to read it, and I'm like 10 chapters into it, and I'm like, I hate this. Like, I hate this a lot. And but the Mandalorians, I feel like it's like almost contrived how they're inserted into like being part of the Empire. Like they have an embassy on Drummond Kaas, and I'm like, but would they really have that? Like, would that be something they would be like interested in having? Like, wouldn't they be kind of playing both sides?
Have you watched the Journal of Master Nosdural?
Dude, I was so excited for like when this game was coming out. Like any amount of media I could get from it, I was just like, yeah, give it to me. Like I was just like drinking in. And I remember like their whole episode on the Mandalorians, but I was like, I still don't love this. Like I don't.
That's fair enough. Because
I didn't feel.
You do explain like, you know, with the Sith manipulation with the gladiator pits on Geonosis and whatever.
So Tad, I know that you haven't played SWTOR and stuff like that, but they basically retcon KOTOR 1 through SWTOR.
How?
Like which is what I really don't like about that continuity is. And so a lot of people feel the same way about KOTOR as like people like yourself and probably myself feel about TCW is it railroads over the old canon and it makes it null and void. So Revan... I
assume you're talking about the whole vitiate manipulating Revan.
Yeah, which I do not care for. Like I liked that Revan was just a Jedi who felt like he was doing something that was right by going to war with the Mandalorians. He was trying to like save the galaxy despite the Jedi's orders and stuff like that. and he's slowly over time of having to make like these very difficult warring decisions fell
That's
to
a
the dark
much more
side.
interesting story like that.
It's much more interesting. And then in the SWOTOR canon, they're like, oh no, Revan was always a Jedi, and then he went to Drummun Kaas and ran to the Emperor, and the Emperor used some Sith alchemy trickery to convince him and Malak to become bad guys. But it's like, what was interesting about Revan was that he found, the Star Forge, and he got drunk on that power of, I can just mass produce ships, and I have like tapped to the dark side at this point. There's no going back for me. And it also neuters the Mandalorians. Like the Mandalorians, they started a war because they were essentially just like, let's just see if we can do it. Let's just see if we're good enough to take over the Republic. And through SWOTOR, they're like manipulated into igniting a war because if my memory serves, the original reason why the Mandalorian War spurred off was because they felt burned by Exar Kun when they helped him in his war, and they didn't feel like they got anything out of it. Realistically, they just sacrificed a bunch of Mandalorians and then got nothing. And so they ignited a new war to try and reclaim what they had lost. Right. And through SWOTOR, they're like, in reality, it was all vitiate. Like, vitiate's... Yeah, Vitiate's Palpatine turned up to 1,000.
I have very mixed feelings on Vitiate as a character because, like, in concept, he's pretty bad. Like, there's the whole, it's like, yeah, he was born with black eyes. He was all evil. Yeah. He drained a whole planet. But there is some really interesting depth to it. Like, there's a whole video. Forget the name of there's a. Basically, somebody did a whole character analysis on Vitiate, and it's fascinating. Like, I recommend anyone to watch it.
And he looks really, really cool as Valkorion, like his later character. He looks way cooler.
Before the Dragon of Zakul.
Wow, that was like a spot-on impersonation.
Oh, thank you.
Like his character design when he's just like the Sith Emperor, like when you go and fight him and stuff like that, is kind of lame. I feel like a lot of the character models, like in the original SWOTOR, kind of look like clay.
I guess I see that.
As the game progresses, like in terms of updating and stuff like that, if you're just using all default skins and you're playing the newer DLCs, you look like a monster next to all of these new character models that are so high res and stuff like that. Valkorion, he looks dope. His armor's sick. Like one of the things I was fawning to Tad about in a previous podcast was how cool I think Roan Fel looks in his Imperial Knight armor. He just looks dope. Like he looks like stellar, and I kind of think it's a similar character design to Roan Fel's Imperial Knight armor as Valkorion's whole Imperial getup. And like I was saying, I feel the same way that Tad feels about TCW when it comes to SWOTOR. But the thing is, like, I still enjoy TCW just because it is more Star Wars, but I only enjoy it like on that surface level of I'm seeing Jedi swing lightsabers at people and I'm still seeing Darth Maul. It's just like that surface level enjoyment that's not deeper like how I enjoyed the previous canon, if that makes sense.
I envy people that can turn their brain off and watch that stuff. Because I can't.
Very mixed. Yeah, I know you have very, very negative feelings on DCW, and I share a lot of them. But it's
even so. When I was watching Rogue One, I had similar instances where I couldn't detach myself from the fact that it wasn't expanded universe, and I actually have a whole manifesto of notes that I took during
as he flips through his notes.
Should be Bria Theron.
All the things all the things I found wrong. Not even just that, but like nitpicky stuff. For instance, the first one I have written down is, why are there moisture evaporators on a moist planet?
Why do lightsaber crystals power the Death Star?
Oh, and then I have Kyber crystals aren't lightsaber crystals.
And they are a new canon, but
they are a new canon.
There was only one Kyber crystal.
It spells differently, but
yes,
that's how they get away with it.
Yes, I've got at least 2 pages, both sides.
Well, I get like what they're going for with like, oh, Kyber crystals are like, the Jedi weapon is a lightsaber, but like, ooh, we're using it for evil now by using it to like power the Death Star and blow up planets and stuff. I get that, but I don't like it. I don't. It's like you guys are saying is like you kind of have to shut your brain off to enjoy. And at the end of the day, TCW and Star Wars Rebels, it's meant for people who are younger than me. Like I don't really feel like it's made for me.
Right.
So I feel like I'm enjoying it.
You know, I was. I would have been 11 when TCW came out. So, and I watched a little bit of it. I saw, like, for example, the episode Rookies. I still love that to death. I had seen the 2003 Clone Wars previously, and I was like, hey, this timeline doesn't add up. Why does he have a Padawan? Why did Anakin have a Padawan? Well,
and I know that's like that's a point of contention for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Is Anakin having a Padawan.
It's just that, you know, TCW as a standalone product, the most part, is pretty great. It's just that if when you try to put it as a cohesive like part of the previously established universe, like you know, all the old comics and novels and all that, there's just so many irreconcilable issues.
The biggest tragedy is my boy Quinlan Voss.
Oh, okay, I love the Big Lebowski. I love the dude. He is not Quinlan Voss.
No, Quinlan Voss is supposed to be like the way that I always perceive Quinlan Voss is, you know, he's literally meant to go undercover, and he has to do so much terrible shit, all in the name of the Jedi, and so it's understandable like how he would progress as a character in that way. Like
his character in the Republic comics was, you know, even he didn't know whether he had fallen to the dark side or not. That's
what's so great. That's what's so great about his character is he's
the dude.
It's like when a cop goes undercover with like a motorcycle gang is to a certain degree, they're undercover for so long. Like you always read stories about a police officer who goes to like go undercover with the Hells Angels. And I remember watching a documentary where this police officer said he like joined the Mongols, I believe. And he was like, the day that I got my vest and was officially initiated into the Mongols, it was more important to me than the day that I got married. It was better than the day that my son was born, because he was so deep into being undercover that was who he was at that point. Like he had become that person in all actuality. And that's how I always viewed Quinlan Voss, is like he's sent undercover by the Jedi, which is admittedly really fucked up of them to like put him through all of this stuff. And so he has to question himself. He's like, am I doing this because I'm undercover? Or am I doing this because this is what I want? Like, is this like who I am now? And that's what was so cool about him. And then he shows up as like Reggae Man in TCW.
Oh man.
And I know that like Tad's got his whole video like the
this into yet another CW rant. I'm sorry. Tad and I have like a million videos talking about this over on Boofire 191's channel.
It's part 3 of Tad Larkin's TCW doesn't fit
podcast. I believe has some sort of rant in it.
Well, like for me, like your guys' TCW, that's my SWOTOR, where like I enjoy SWOTOR on a surface level. It feels like almost like a guilty pleasure. Like it's like eating, you know, grits and cheese and some coleslaw and some cornbread. Like it feels like comfort food almost. Even though
I feel you.
Even though like all of the Revan stuff, all of like that DLC stuff, I just am so against. I'm so against Revan. Like they couldn't decide whether or not they wanted him to be dark side or light side ending Revan, so like why not just have him be both? So he comes back as a ghost. His like force spirit is split into 2, dark side and light side. I'm like, no. No, just don't do that. Why would you do this?
When I was younger and I wasn't as well versed in KOTOR lore and such, like I thought the idea of like, oh, you know, okay, Revan, he was once a light sider, he was once a dark sider. Maybe it could make sense that his soul is split. But it's like learning more. It's like it what's the word? It takes away so much of the nuance that there was to Revan's character.
It's like if they went back and retconned Kreia into just being a straightforward black and white character.
That would.
I think that would
Yeah.
It's a lot more people off, even.
Like, she's by far what. Actually, this is going to lead into, since we're coming up on an hour here, we can talk Mandalorians.
Oh yeah, we've deviated. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. I think at this point we're doing pretty good, but we talked about interesting Mandalorian leaders, who you guys' favorite ones were, what you guys think are like some good jumping off points for Mandalorians. We kind of talked about the Mandalorian timeline, but one thing I wanted to touch on previous to us getting into our next segment, which was we have some audience questions, is something that I've always been interested in, but like very rarely looked into, was what happened to the Mandalorians after the Mandalorian Wars, previous to the KOTOR games. So like, that's something that like I've just never really read a lot about, because there's not a ton of information between KOTOR 1 and the prequels. There's stuff for like Outbound Flight and like all that good stuff, but like that there's no real stories like really in depth outside of the Darth Bane trilogy.
Very few. Between KOTOR and the prequels, you're asking. So
yes,
major stuff that happens. There's everything that happens in SWTOR. So, alliance with the Sith Empire. Eventually, there's Artus Mandalore the Vindicated, who's a really cool character, by the way, who's then
check him out
by Shae Vizsla, my absolute waifu. A total goddess right there. She's also a really interesting pair, cool, and then part of the Eternal Alliance, whatever. Not much happens until the new Sith Wars, which was a time period of 1,000 years where basically the Republic was almost brought to its knees by constant war, and during for most of that time period, it's like Mandalorians were just marauders and raiders and like not great people until and it got especially bad once the Kandorian plague broke out during the tail end of the conflict. During the new Sith Wars, actually, the Mandalorians were allied with the Jedi, believe it or not, which in a very interesting turn of events.
They went back.
So at the tail end of the time period, Kandorian plague, which was basically like the worst pandemic the galaxy has ever seen, parallels to real life right now.
Yeah, parallel to our current real life existence. The nightmare escape that we're all living through.
So Mandalore was particularly devastated. So one warrior named Aga Awad found like his clan had basically like all died, and he was like, okay, sucks, no more. He started a movement called the Return, which like called Mandalorians from all over the galaxy to return home, and like, okay, we need to get our shit together. So he became Mandalore the Uniter and had a brief golden age for the Mandalorian people, which was pretty cool.
They always have some grand name like Mandalore the Preserver or Mandalore the Ultimate.
No.
They always have like a pretty grandiose title.
Not all of them.
Yes.
Some of them just go by Mandalore. Some of them are humble. They just go like, I'm just Mandalore.
Well, no, it's not just
my father was Mandalore the Preserver, please.
Then we come to the event called the Mandalorian Excision.
This is where I start branching off and not following that.
Because in Tad's...
For me, it turns into an alternate, like, third timeline, one that includes TCW.
Yeah, because this is the origin of the massive fracturing stuff. Because the Excision, from an out-of-universe perspective, it was made to come up with way to try to reconcile the massive differences in the portrayal of the Mandalorians in previous media and in the Clone Wars show. Semi works ish, kind of, if you squint, which I kind of have to do. But so basically, the Republic since Mandalore had grown and become its like a regional power, like where it was protecting surrounding systems for big payments. So it had become a big. The Republic, fearing another Mandalorian wars, which is kind of irrational considering during the past like 3 wars the Mandalorians were your allies. Preemptive strike on Mandalore with the judicial forces and Jedi and whatever. Basically reduced a lot of the worlds like Mandalore, Concord Dawn, Ordo, Gargon, to glass them if you're a Halo fan. It's the terminology. So turned portions of them into I said portions. Listen to me, Dave Filoni and George Lucas. It's portions, not the entirety of the planet. Portions.
Even though if you watch the show, the entire planet is a desert.
Don't get me anyway.
Which is like always a thing in Star Wars. They always have like one geographical feature, and I don't know who needs to hear this. An entire civilization cannot live on a totally desert planet. It just there would be no way to exist outside of like having to bring in resources from someone else. I've always been confused by why people are able to live on Tatooine because like nothing grows there. It's just like the worst place in the galaxy.
It's only in the thousands, I think. So it's semi.
And then they're like, "Hey, episode 7, guess what? Another desert planet." Anyways, continue.
Right,
sorry.
So, basically, during the Republic occupation, those that bent the knee, that they became what is known as new Mandalorians. They basically spit in the face of everything it means to be a Mandalorian, but they basically adopted an aristocratic society that blah blah blah, all that nonsense.
Oh, so that's like where the peaceful
exactly.
So gotcha.
But so the ones that were unrepentant and were managed to keep being based as all hell became known as the Akalit, which means the faithful. So that continued for another 700 years, but the new Mandalorians like waned in power and whatever. But they had a resurgence following the Great Clan Wars, in which it was more devastation to the planet and whatever. And the Akalit had split into the true Mandalorians and the Death Watch, and so there's a lot of split. I think one of the like visual dictionaries or something says like Mandalorians have a dizzying array of different splits and factions and whatever. That's the best way to put it. I've had to make a massive diagram explaining all that. I'll send a link.
Yeah, we'll put in the link dump.
Yes. Because it's explaining the whole descent of lineages and whatever. So from there, the new Mandalorians had a resurgence. They became recognized as the Mandalorian government, even though Mandalorian society government is a very loose term, because it's a very loose affiliation of all the different clans and whatnot. And there's the whole events of the Mandalorian Civil War, but read the Boba Fett Open Seasons comics, as we said earlier. And those are
great
major things. There's also 2 wars with there was war with the Thirsian Sun Guard, which are a faction that's they're pretty prominent in a lot of EU stuff. Like if you've read the Darth Plagueis novel, they're basically become like Plagueis' servants and whatnot, but like one of the like very few that can rival the Mandalorians in combat prowess, as renowned as them. And they have
suspiciously like Neo Crusaders.
Well, their design actually is what inspired the Imperial Guards. Then there's the Ithulan genocide, in which the Akalit killed a bunch of these guys called the Ithulans, which planted the seeds of split, and which planted the seeds for Jaster Muriel to write the Super Commando Codex, and the Death Watch to be in true Mandalorians to split apart. So
Now, before all this, it was a little bit more boring, but also a lot less convoluted. Where after the new Sith Wars, they kind of like devolved in a way, where they weren't this like great warrior culture that they once were under Mandalore the Ultimate or Mandalore the Indomitable, and they'd become petty pirates. Any shipping, like the Trade Federation hated going through the Mandalore sector, because that was where their shipping was always guaranteed to be raided. They were pirates. They would go to neighboring systems and just raid them just for fun. They were almost like Vikings in a sense, where it's like, hey, it's summer. Want to go kill some people? Yeah, sure. Where do you want to go this year? I'm tired of going to Rancho.
The weather's
go to
fine.
England. But and then it was this pettiness where Jaster Muriel comes in and he says, we used to be so much more awesome. So why don't we, kind of do away with all this? And like I said earlier, like, let's if you want to do this, that's fine. Just do it for money. Be honorable about it. And that's where you get the split. However, after the Mandalorian Civil War, it got to the point where it's like, all right, that escalated pretty badly. And they basically just kind of kept to themselves for the rest of the time until the Empire came in after the Clone Wars and said, hey, all that Beskar you guys have, yeah, that's ours now.
I'll take your entire stock.
Yeah, I'll take all your stonks.
Stonks.
So, as we're coming up here to about an hour 15 minutes, I did want to hit you guys with a non-Mandalorian question. So, every week from now on, we're going to be taking questions from the audience. And we have a question from Dark Lord Paz, at least I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it, P-A-S. He writes and he asked, what do you think would happen if Lord Khan and the Brotherhood survived the thought bomb? Any changes to the war, and what do you think would have happened to Bane? So, I'm going to go ahead and kind of start off my quick thoughts on this. Hopefully we didn't transition too quickly from Mandalorians for everybody's taste. But, so my whole opinion on the Brotherhood of Darkness and Lord Khan in general is they were never really Sith. Like, they were never really Sith Lords. They were never really great at being dark side Force users. I feel like they were kind of written to be weak, and that's why Bane felt like he needed to rise through the ranks and become the big bad that he eventually becomes. And I don't know if you guys are really familiar with the Darth Bane trilogy in general.
The first one.
So in the first Darth Bane novel, Darth Bane joins the Sith Order after he murders a dude in a mining accident. He murders one of his father's friends, and the new Sith Wars are like they're hot, like they're still going on.
Soldiers that he was playing Pazak with.
Exactly. So that's right. That dude, he bites off that guy's thumb in the mine. I forgot that he does that because the guy was trying to jab his. That first like couple chapters are really visceral. Like, he's fighting that dude like who's drunk in the mine. He's like trying to stab him in the eye with his thumb, and he catches it in his mouth and bites his thumb off, and which I forgot about. Like, geez, man, it's a really visceral memory. But he joins the Sith Empire eventually, and he gets recognized as being Force sensitive, goes to Korriban, he gets trained there, and after getting just his shit kicked in several times over by other Sith, eventually he decides to start reading up on some old dusty books. But I think that if Khan and the Sith of that era were to have survived, I still feel like they would have lost. Like, they were already in like their death rolls. Like, they were already losing, essentially. That's why they performed the thought bomb, because it was kind of like a last hurrah. They're like, maybe we can win if we do this. And I still feel like Bane would have been able to go off and create his own thing. I definitely think the Sith would have lingered around for a couple more decades as being, multiple Sith, but I don't think they ever would have grown to the same prominence. And I would be curious to see as to whether or not they would continue to have Jedi Supreme Chancellors, because if you have an imperial government that's being run by Sith, would you have Jedi Masters who are running the Republic side government? Like, it's essentially like having, Catholics and Lutherans fighting against each other, and they're both running their own governments. Which, historically that may be accurate, but I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that. Like,
there have been Jedi Supreme Chancellors in the past.
Yeah, so that's like what I would be curious to see if they would continue to have Jedi Supreme Chancellors, because it becomes less in vogue as time goes on. Like, the Jedi start to become less outwardly, less publicly political, and they're still tied inevitably to the Republic. Like, they're still forced to be political through some form of allegiance, but I wonder if we would still have outwardly involved Jedi politicians as you had in the past.
Well, if the thought bomb never happened, there might not be a republic after a while. Because the Sith did have the momentum during the Battle of Ruusan. It was only after Valentine Thorfalla came in and reinforced them that they started to rethink their strategy. And it was Bane's meddling that told Lord Khan, hey, you do this, let's do this, and that'll kill everyone, and nobody will stand in your way. And I don't remember correctly if Khan knew that the thought bomb was going to take him with it, but
I don't believe he did. From my memory, I don't believe he did. I do remember Valentine Farfalla being, God, that name is so hard for me to say. It just like jumbles up my mouth. But I remember like his descriptions in the book is basically being like excruciatingly handsome and charismatic, which is something I was like, he's like so primped and proper, like whenever he shows up, and Lord Hoth is just so sick of his shit at certain night. He's like, dude, just leave me alone. He's like, just let me continue to do this. And it was really cool, like seeing Jedi generals like previous to the Clone Wars, like Lord Hoth, like
Jedi lords are such an interesting concept.
Exactly, it's sick. It's super cool.
Let's take on the whole medieval it's like the new Sith Wars are in a lot of ways are comparable to the medieval period of Earth. It's like where the Jedi Knights were the most knight like. It was very it is called the Republic Dark Age for a reason. But
yeah, and Lord Hoth, like, he literally is basically wearing chainmail armor. Like, it's not literally but he's wearing like a breastplate. Like, he looks like
fun fact,
a feudal era like warlord essentially.
Fun fact, Lord Hoth's birth name was Rolan, which just so happens his namesake just so happened to be Roland Dyer from the KOTOR comics of the Mandalorian. It's explained like out of universe that like eventually Roland was seen as a hero like in the Republic's eyes. So so even 2,000 years later, there was a freaking Jedi named after him, which is pretty damn cool.
And I think the new Sith Wars, they lasted like 1,000 years or some nonsense. Like, it went on for a long time, and
it's one of my favorite like time periods because it's so open to like storytelling. It's so long. It's got so many different factions, and it's interesting.
And I like all of the stuff between Bane and Revan. Like, I really, really enjoy where he goes to
when he finds Holocron.
Yeah, like, I don't know, do they call it Rakata Prime in the Bane novel, or do they call it Lahone?
It's Lehon in the Bane novel. At that point, it's been forgotten.
So, like, I like when he goes and he interacts with Bane, and like Bane, not like Revan didn't have like the rule of two, like he's not the one who invented it, but he had the belief that one Sith Lord should have one Sith apprentice, and Bane like just took that like to the extreme. What's that?
The blueprints for the rule of two, I guess.
Yeah, like he had the bones for it. Like, he was probably like cooking it up in the background there, and I would be curious to see. I still don't think, like, I've always considered the Brotherhood of Darkness to be weak. Like, they have like weak leadership, even from like the onset of the books. Like, some of the opening lines between the quote unquote Sith Lords from their order is them. They all have like this silent understanding that we're not all actually equal. Like we're pretending like we're equal. Khan's saying we're equal, but in reality we're not. And
I agree with your assessment in the end. It's like the Brotherhood of Darkness was in the end doomed to fail because the dark side in the end is about, individual, like
it's selfishness.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
At its core.
So yeah, and yeah, it's pretty outright stated that they didn't hold much of a candle to the Sith Lords of old. Like,
I mean, they even say that. Like they talk about like former Sith saber masters, and they're like, we're basically all like fumbling morons in comparison. It's like kind of like the same vein of the things that Kreia said about
talking about like Tulak Horde and
yeah, like saying like they were true masters, and like we've kind of lost that art over a long period of time. And Bane, in his interactions with the Brotherhood overall, it just kind of feels like obviously there's the writing contrivance that they are written to be kind of weak because Bane has to have like that hurdle to get over to really push himself over that plateau of becoming essentially the godfather to all of the future Sith.
Right.
And I like at that point the Republic was super war torn. Like they were very over it at that point. Like after generation of generation, it's like a Warhammer situation where like so many people are dying.
The new Sith Wars are the most Warhammer like that start. Well, there's the Pius Dia Crusades, but
dark.
In terms of like being all grim dark and everything, it's like war, plagues, everybody's freaking dying, like technological devolvement.
But probably a pretty good time to live like in the Outer Rim, I would say. Like if you're just on a planet that no one really cares about and you're just hanging out.
I was gonna say Dez had a pretty rough time.
Yeah, he was like born like into like some form of like the way that I consider his childhood was essentially I kind of equate it to Rapture, like the BioShock games. It's like capitalism turned up to 1,000,000. Mm. Like you're born into corporate slavery and you have to work your way out of like
because he was like it's very similar, like I guess in some sense his backstory to Bane from the DC. Oh my god, Darth Bane and Bane have the same backstory.
But my thoughts, quote unquote, on the thought bomb are that it was an eventuality. Like Khan and all of his generals
to manipulate them into some sort of suicide pact like that. It's like
they were so desperate to win at that point because like Tad was saying, they had upward momentum, but like at that point the galaxy was just so over it. They were so war torn. Something had to break at some point. Like I think that they more than likely eventually would have been their own demise, like as most Sith Lords eventually are.
Right. I mean,
but does anybody have any closing thoughts on the thought bomb?
If the Sith weren't wiped out in such like a quick event like that, I wonder like what differences there would be to the Rusan Reformation and stuff. Like if it had been a protracted campaign to wipe them out and such.
And that has like sweeping consequences because there wouldn't be, a Valley of the Jedi for Kyle Katarn to go and hang out in like way later on. It would like massively change the landscape of the geopolitical makeup of the galaxy overall. Like the war would still need to continue. People would still be like throwing all of their, because like the Jedi at that point were recruiting literally children to go and fight off in their wars, which is. Man, that was definitely a decision that they made. Like they would still be at that because they were so desperate just for warm bodies who had any form of midichlorian count.
All the artwork of the new Sith Wars, you see people with blasters and full body armor fighting alongside tribesmen with spears. That's one of the most fascinating things about it to me. Like, just just that a visual like that is just such a unique and interesting thing.
And there's like that great artwork, like Jedi versus the Sith, Essential Guide to the Force, one of the best source books that has ever been made. Even if you just want to look at artwork in it, it's amazing. Like if I'm just like bored like on an evening night and I just want an evening night. If I'm just bored on an evening and I just want to like be involved in something Star Wars related, but I don't feel like using my brain to read, I'll just go and look at that artwork and stuff like that. But there's like the artwork in there during that time period where they're showing up to, backwater planets and they're recruiting Xana to go and fight for the Jedi, and they're all in these tattered clothes and like they're clearly like in some real hillbilly Star Wars universe type of landscape. And these Jedi are like, come with us. Like things will totally be cool if you come hop on our ship and we totally won't drop you into a war zone. Like, don't worry, everything's going to be totally fine. And it's like a weird mix of feudal era, like warmongering with like kind of like a freeze in technological advancement. Because when the book starts, like it's years and years before Bane actually joins, and the war is still happening there. Like it's just going and going and going nonstop. And I would be curious to see if Bane if he still left the Brotherhood, if he would still make the rule of two, and if it would still be successful. Like, would it distract from his order that the Brotherhood's still out there doing their stuff?
Similar to Bane from DC Comics, not only was he physically power, like he was also like a crafty bastard. Like, so I feel like he still would have figured out some way to get them out of his way.
And I like that Bane just nonchalantly becomes very successful and rich. Just by the third book, like him and Xana are both like wealthy, like business people, just on the side, like as like a side gig. Like they're just known business people, and he's just like hiding in the shadows doing that. And I think that because Bane just needed there to be a distraction for him to be able to go off and do his thing. And if there's not the distraction, which I always thought that even if the new Sith Wars just kept going, he still could have gone off and done his own thing. Like he still could have just chose one apprentice, and that would have given, because the chaos of the galaxy at that point in time would have made it easier for him to conceal himself. But the dark side had a larger presence, and obviously the Jedi are looking for Sith at that point.
We'd have to come up with a way to play the Republic and the Brotherhood against each other to get the Brotherhood out of his way, I feel.
Yeah.
Because at that point he then has two adversaries.
Yeah, because the Brotherhood was actively after him. Like they were sending people out to try and kill him.
I don't think the rule of two would have been as successful as it was if he had to divide his energy and focus on two enemies rather than one. Because that was what made the whole rule of two work. It was
We have
we have the Jedi, we want to get rid of them. So let's, train each other, and with each generation of Sith, they'll get stronger. Whereas if you have Khan, or even if it goes further on, if you have the Brotherhood of Darkness in the future to contend with as well, you're then having to divert resources, and that's just inefficient.
So you got the Brotherhood of Darkness, you got the Jedi, and in a very literal way, you also have your Sith apprentice who is actively you're training them to kill you. So Bane has 3 enemies like all at one go. And I just want more Xana. I just would love to be able to see. Like I just wanted a book with Xana, at least just one follow-up, even if it was just a short, because I know like it would be, you wouldn't get returns on your investments over a certain period of time if you just kept telling the story of each Sith Lord. But I would have liked to have seen Xana and Cognis. It's Cognis, right? Am I misremembering that name?
Yes.
Yeah, like I would have liked to have seen how she trained somebody, because Bane still has like kind of that like little imprint on her at the end of the trilogy, where which I believe Drew Capuchin like literally says like Bane does not take over her body. Like it's Darth Xana, but it would be interesting to see, because she has been taught in Sith sorcery, so she understands like all of like this weird voodoo magic, Night Sister type stuff. It would have been interesting to see how she would pass that along to Cognis, if she even does, because Sith sorcery is by and large, by the time that Palpatine comes to power, basically gone. But Palpatine obviously isn't going to show his
Alone
whole
is
hand.
pretty in the modern era is like the only modern Sith to do anything. Because like, if you read the book of Sith, like he's pretty explicit about like, yeah, I had to dig deep to figure out this shit.
And I'm not willing to share it with anybody.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I just wanted to get some closing thoughts from you guys. Do you guys have any upcoming projects? Anything that you guys want to plug at all?
I need to be back to being more active on YouTube. I've just been.
Sam and I actually wrote out a extensive history of the Clone Wars multimedia project.
That sounds like a massive undertaking.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be like.
There's still 2 more
We've
years.
only done the first year so far, but it's already gonna be like 2 hours.
So, like, are you guys gonna like both like be hosting it together?
Go.
Yes.
That is sick. I like that a lot. 2 Mandalorians like recounting the history of the multimedia project.
I can't wait to share it with you.
Tad, do you have any closing thoughts outside of that?
It's not really working. I've been playing. So actually, I bought. Well, a friend of mine bought the new EA Star Wars Battlefront 2, and I'm playing a lot of that instead of writing videos. So I should probably go back to writing videos. Surprisingly, I don't hate it.
I mean, it's made by Dice, and Dice kind of for me has like a bumpy past. Like huge fan of Battlefield Bad Company 2, Battlefield 3. I'm not joking. I played that game for literally 3,000 hours. I just have so many hours in Battlefield 3. Battlefront 1 came out, and I was like, there's nothing in this game. It's pointless. Like, I don't know why they made it. But Battlefront 2, I've heard nothing but good things about. Like, even like the Reddit community. Reddit is like very
at the beginning, but it's like to my understanding
with the loot box stuff. But like Reddit in general is very pessimistic. But even the Reddit community for Battlefront 2 is like, it's dope. Everyone should check it out. Like, their community manager is like known as being like, they love him. Like, they love even the community manager for a video game. So I've always meant to go check it out. I have like whatever EA's like Game Pass thing is. I can't remember what it's called. But I have that because my fiance, she's huge into games as well. Probably more so than I am at this point. But she wanted to have that so she could play various different games and do all that good stuff. And I played it a little bit then, but I never got super deep diving into the multiplayer. But I did play the single player campaign, and it was just good to see Luke being Luke. It was just good to see Luke Lukeing about stuff. You know, he was like just being a Jedi, like hunting down artifacts and stuff like that. It just felt like a warm blanket, you know, like on a cold winter evening. It just felt good.
I'm not bothered
to
with
see
the
that.
story. I'm happy. I'm finally good at a shooter. I never played online with the real Battlefront 2. It was always against bots, so yeah, I was good. But this I'm playing against real people, and I'm like,
When you
okay.
put it that way, I'm now questioning my
Your prowess.
prowess.
But there's a huge group of expanded universe lovers like in the Battlefront 2 community. Like there's one guy who just constantly is modding in.
Oh, I've seen that.
Yeah, like he's like great. Like he modded in Jason Solo, Darth Malgus.
Where can I download this stuff?
I'll have to find it on the Battlefront 2 community subreddit. I'll also leave that in the link dump. But like he did Mara Jade, Luke, like EU Luke, Darth Caedus, Darth Malgus. I believe he did Revan. Like he's put in a ton, and like they're really high quality models. Like I don't know how he does it, but it's
of particular interest to you, Tad. There is also a Captain Fordo mod. So
Oh, thank God. As a rule, I don't play as the ARC troopers. That's one of my pet peeves. Like I do kind of psychoanalyze things, but it's at the point where I'm like, oh, it's not a real ARC trooper. I'm not going to be that. I'll just keep being my heavy.
There's the Clone Commandos.
I'm annoyed that they don't have the sound for the DC-17, and that you also can't use the interchangeable weapon system. So I don't use the commandos either. If they at least had the correct sound for the DC-17, I would be more wanting to play as them, but I'm just like,
We're those kind of nerds.
Down to like the sound effects if they're not right for you.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, that's how I feel about some of the newer Halo stuff. It's like, plasma rifles don't sound like that.
So I've never Halo. I played a ton of Halo 2 and Halo 3, like during like the heyday of Xbox Live, but I never like I always would see the novels and stuff like that, but they never grabbed me like in the same way that Star Wars did.
I have read, watched, listened, or whatever, or played every single piece of Halo media. So, if you have any questions.
So, do you like the new Halo games?
4 and 5 have their moments. I am overall, I believe Infinite, the upcoming one, is heading in the right direction. I think we're in for a treat. But I think they very much learned from their mistakes. But in terms of the Halo EU, though, all of Reach, it's not just. It's one of the best sci-fi novels I've ever read.
I was gonna say, like, just in general, like, I'm a huge fan of science fiction. Obviously, like, we all are seemingly into the same sci-fi fantasy series, but I always tell people that science fiction has had like a massive influence on my life. Like, Philip K. Dick is one of the most influential writers of my entire life, and like Foundation, obviously one of the absolute best series ever written in terms of science fiction. And I'm rereading through Foundation right now. I'm actually thinking about, I don't want to deviate too much from Star Wars overall, but I do want to maybe touch on other subjects. So I'm thinking about making some videos for the A Song of Ice and Fire universe, and I want to make a video about Foundation, just to like write like a love letter to Isaac Asimov in general. And Philip K. Dick, I feel like, is maybe a little bit too metaphorical and out there for a lot of people, because there are a lot of his books that are just, they're so fantastical that it's almost hard to understand what he's talking about. So to say that a Halo novel is like one of the best science fiction novels you've ever read, it makes me want to read it, just because I love science fiction in general.
Island in the Halo series is great. It's fantastic. It very much leans into it's more the military sci-fi stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it lays the foundation for the Halo universe. It's very much. It is. I don't want to say too much. I'll let you.
Don't want to spoil it. All right. Well, with that being said, we'll conclude today. We can, as I always tell Tad, we can talk Star Wars until the sun. Yeah, until the sun burns out. But hopefully you guys had fun. I hope that you guys come back on the podcast. I love talking to you guys. I like this 3-person setup. It requires less. Well, it requires less thought from me. Like, I don't have to.
It's good actually being on a podcast with Sombraptor again, because it's been a while since we did Cantina Roundtable.
We need to talk to Bufire.
We'll get him on the podcast too. Bring him on.
Too.
Yeah, why not?
Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode, and please, 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 I implore you, make sure you go and check out both of these young gentlemen's YouTube channels. I find all of their content extremely enjoyable. I love just binge watching them while I'm just doing chores around the house, just listening to them almost like in a podcast setting, and they're a ton of fun. Great dudes. But until next week, we'll see you soon.
Thank you for watching. Retushemi.
Bye.